My mother looked at me only once in a way that truly registered my existence, and it was the day she realized that the well she thought she could draw from was entirely dry. She didn't see me when I was standing right in front of her for 30 years, but she saw the absence of the person she needed, and that absence was me.
That is the devastating cruelty of emotional neglect. The moment they finally look, it's not for you. It's for what you can give them, and by then, there is nothing left. I need to tell you how we got to that moment. Because it wasn't a sudden break. It was a slow, deliberate starvation, wrapped in the guise of a normal, functioning family. Growing up, my brother Michael was the son.
He was the golden child, not just in ability, but in designation. Every achievement was monumental. Every scrape needed a full medical examination. Every mood dictated the emotional temperature of the house. I was the moon, orbiting silently, reflecting the light Michael cast, but generating none of my own in my mother's eyes. I learned quickly that attention was a finite resource, and Michael had the lifetime subscription. I remember being about 7 years old, finally managing to win the science fair. It was a tedious project on soil erosion, but I'd worked on it for weeks, staying up late in the garage, meticulously arranging the sand and water. I came home holding the bright blue ribbon, heart hammering, ready to present this undeniable evidence of my worth. Michael, meanwhile, had decided that afternoon that he was tired of his bike and wanted a new, more expensive model. When I walked into the kitchen, Mother was tracing the dimensions of Michael's desired new bicycle on the countertop with her finger, already absorbed in the logistics of payment and pickup. I held up the ribbon, clearing my throat softly. "Mom, look, I won first place." She glanced down, her eyes barely focusing on the vibrant color of the ribbon before snapping back to the bike schematic. "Oh, that's nice, sweetie," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the sparkle she used when Michael found a missing baseball card. "Now listen, Michael, thinks the red one is faster, but the blue one has better reviews. What do you think, Sarah? Focus now. This is important." And just like that, the ribbon dissolved into meaningless cloth in my hand. It wasn't that she was mean, she was simply indifferent. My victory was background noise, a minor chord in the symphony of Michael's existence. That night, I carefully ironed the ribbon and tucked it into a drawer, learning my first profound lesson. My accomplishments didn't matter unless they somehow served as a reflection of Michael's future brilliance. This pattern cemented itself throughout my childhood. Michael got the private tutors, I got the library card. Michael's soccer games were mandatory family attendance affairs, complete with detailed analysis afterward. My school plays, where I usually worked backstage, a quiet irony not lost on my adolescent self, were optional if the weather was bad or if Michael had homework. I remember one particularly cold winter when I came home from school with a high fever, shaking so badly I could barely walk straight. I stumbled into the living room where my mother was helping Michael polish his application essay for the high school debate team. I murmured that I felt sick. She put her hand on my forehead, a brief, cool touch, and said, "Oh, honey, you're just a little warm." "Don't distract Michael. He's on a deadline. Go lay down." No thermometer, no soup, no checking on me later. I spent the next 3 days in bed, drifting in and out of fever dreams, the sound of my mother's encouraging laughter filtering in from the living room, always directed at Michael's brilliant sentence structure or profound insights. When Michael got the flu a year later, the house became a quarantine zone, stocked with every remedy known to modern medicine, and my mother didn't leave his bedside for 72 hours. That kind of sustained, passive rejection doesn't just hurt, it reshapes your internal landscape. I grew up believing I was fundamentally flawed, boring, or perhaps just too much work. If my own mother, the person who was supposed to be my safe harbor, didn't find me interesting enough to look at, why should anyone else? So I started to make myself smaller. I became meticulously helpful, overly compliant, desperately seeking that tiny flickering moment of approval that never came. I learned to anticipate Michael's needs, because fulfilling them might accidentally place me within my mother's orbit, even if just as a satellite. When Michael went off to college, Ivy League, naturally, a victory my mother celebrated like she'd won the Nobel Prize, the house finally quieted. But that quiet wasn't peaceful. It was echoing. I was still there, finishing high school, preparing for my own path, a state college close to home, practical, affordable, and she barely noticed the shift. Her attention simply followed Michael. Now, her energy was funneled into weekly calls detailing his course load, his social life, his future trajectory. My life, my choices, my struggles with my own classes felt insignificant in comparison. If I tried to share something, say a stressful exam or a new job I was excited about, she would nod vaguely and then steer the conversation back to Michael. "Oh, that's nice, Sarah, but Michael's working on this incredible internship in New York. Do you think he should wear the blue or the gray suit for the interview? Focus now. This is important." That phrase, "focus now, this is important," became the theme song of my young adulthood, always deployed to signal that whatever I was talking about was irrelevant fluff that needed to be discarded immediately in favor of Michael's grand narrative. The result of this constant emotional erasure was that by the time I entered my 20s, I was emotionally adrift. I had no idea how to define my own worth because I had never been mirrored back positive affirmation. I sought validation in external, often destructive ways. I chose partners who demanded a lot from me, who needed constant saving or maintenance, because that need, even if it was toxic, felt like a form of attention. I threw myself into demanding, thankless jobs, hoping that professional success would finally be the ribbon bright enough to catch her eye. It never was. I earned my degree, got a stable job in nonprofit management, bought a small condo, all milestones achieved quietly, celebrated only by friends who truly saw me. When I told my mother I was moving into my own place, she simply asked if it had an extra room for Michael, in case he ever decided to move back from the city. Michael, meanwhile, was the poster child for effortless success. He was charming, successful, married well, and built a seemingly flawless life in a high-rise office building downtown. He embodied everything my mother had poured her hopes, dreams, and finite emotional resources into. She used him as her social currency, dropping mentions of his latest venture or promotion into every conversation. And Michael? He was lovely, really. He wasn't malicious. He was just accustomed to being placed on a pedestal. He never had to fight for attention, so he never noticed that I was drowning in the moat below. This went on for years, this careful, distant dance. I maintained the relationship with my mother out of duty and the faint, persistent hope that one day the scale would tip and she would realize she had 2 children. I visited on holidays, always brought the perfect dish, and always ensured I had a conversational escape route planned for when the inevitable Michael monologue began. I protected myself by building strong, thick emotional walls, coating myself in an armor of indifference, convincing myself that I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need her love. I was fine. And then the universe decided it was time for a reckoning. The crisis wasn't mine, it was Michael's. It wasn't a minor setback, it was catastrophic. Michael's thriving business wasn't quite as thriving as he had led everyone to believe. A combination of bad investments, unchecked arrogance, and maybe a touch of poor ethical judgment led to a complete financial collapse, involving legal action, bankruptcy, and public humiliation. The golden image shattered, and it shattered loudly, taking Michael's marriage and his entire constructed life with it. The shockwave that hit my mother was physical. Evelyn, my powerful, stoic mother, who had always maintained an impenetrable composure, suddenly looked small and broken. The failure of Michael was the failure of her entire life's work, her identity as the mother of the genius. She didn't know how to function outside the realm of success. She was adrift, panicked, reaching desperately for a familiar anchor in the storm.
And because Michael was physically and emotionally unavailable, he had retreated entirely, consumed by shame and legal woes. She finally, belatedly, turned to me. I remember the day she called. Not to ask about my job, or my life, or my partner. She called, crying hysterically, needing immediate emotional triage. She drove over immediately, unannounced, arriving at my small condo looking like a refugee. Her hair was messy, her clothes were crumpled, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She didn't hug me. She simply collapsed onto my sofa and began weeping about the disgrace, the legal fees, the loss of Michael's glorious future. I stood there in my own living room, watching her unravel. And for the first time in my life, I felt utterly calm. A cold, surgical calmness. She was demanding comfort, expecting me to rush to her side, to affirm her pain, to validate her grief over the loss of her perfect son's perfect life. But as I watched her, all I could hear were the years of silence, the echoes of her indifference ringing in the small space. I saw 7-year-old me with the blue ribbon, 17-year-old me with the fever, 27-year-old me trying to share good news, all brushed aside for the sake of Michael's brilliance. She looked up at me finally, her face crumpled with expectation, waiting for my pity, waiting for the unconditional love she had never earned. "Sarah, please," she choked out, reaching a hand towards me. "I don't know how to handle this. I need you to be strong for me. I need you to help me figure out what to do." And that was the moment. The exact second she realized the well was dry. I didn't move towards her. I stayed perfectly still, leaning against the doorframe, watching her through the distance of 3 decades of neglect. My voice was steady, maybe a little hollow. "Mom," I said, "I can't. I don't have anything left to give you." She frowned, confusion replacing the desperate sadness. She couldn't compute the refusal. "What are you talking about?" "Of course you do. You're my daughter. You're the practical one. The practical one. The role I was assigned when I was deemed unworthy of being the brilliant one. I am practical," I confirmed, "and practically speaking, I have spent my entire life trying to fill your emotional tank, while mine has been running on fumes. I have been sitting right here, in the shadow, trying to get you to notice that I was struggling, that I needed your support, your presence, your interest. And you never saw it. You were always too busy tending to the golden child to even toss me a bucket of water." The shift in her expression was immediate and terrifying. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was the dawning realization of guilt and profound self-inflicted loss. The sight of me, healthy, grounded, but utterly remote, was finally hitting home. I don't understand, Sarah. I love you. I always have. And here, I finally broke through the polite, deferential daughter persona I had maintained for so long. "You loved the idea of having a daughter, Mom. You loved the comfort of having a quiet, manageable child who didn't need much. But you didn't invest in me. When you only pour your entire self into one child, the other one doesn't magically become self-sustaining. They learn to survive. They learn to compartmentalize. And they learn not to rely on you. And that's what I did. I survived you, Mom. And now you need me to save you from this crisis. But I am emotionally bankrupt because you never contributed anything to my reserves." The room went silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. She looked down at her hands, which were shaking. The tears came back, but these were different. These were tears of true regret, not just pity for Michael. She saw the chasm she had created, and for the first time, she saw that the victim of her neglect was not Michael, who was now dealing with the consequences of his own entitlement, but me.
who was dealing with the consequences of her indifference. She whispered, "I am so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Michael needed so much attention. He was so bright."
And that's the tragedy, I replied, my voice softening slightly, but the resolve remaining firm. He needed attention because he was being trained to expect it, and I needed it because I was being trained to expect none. And the difference is, I learned how to live without it. You taught me how to be self-sufficient, how to heal my own wounds, how to celebrate my own victories. You didn't mean to, but you inadvertently trained me to not need you at all. That confrontation lasted hours. It was messy, painful, and fundamentally unsatisfying in the way real emotional breakthroughs often are. There was no magic hug that fixed everything. There was no sudden rush of forgiveness. I couldn't undo the lifetime of feeling invisible. But there was acknowledgement. She finally, truly saw the damage. She saw the emotional scarcity she had imposed on me, and she saw the cruel irony. The child she invested everything in was ruined, and the child she ignored was functional, capable, but emotionally unavailable to her when she needed it most. In the ensuing months, as Michael slowly started the painful process of rebuilding his life, my relationship with my mother changed drastically. It didn't become close and warm. That ship had sailed decades ago. But it became honest. She still talks about Michael, of course, but now, when I share a success or a struggle, she stops and looks at me. She asks follow-up questions. She attempts to engage. It feels clumsy, like someone trying to learn a language at 60 years old. She is attempting to fill a hole that should have been filled in infancy. And while I appreciate the effort, and while I recognize that her regret is genuine and heavy, the reality is that the foundation of our relationship is permanently compromised. I can have coffee with her now without feeling the need to armor up. I can listen to her talk about her day without mentally cataloging my escape routes. But I maintain boundaries that are necessary for my own survival. I offer support, but only within my emotional means, because I learned that if I waited for her to save me, I would wait forever. I saved myself, one small, ignored victory at a time. And now, I am standing in my own light, a light that she can only see now because the sun she worshipped has dimmed. This story isn't about blaming the golden child, or even demanding an apology, although the acknowledgement was necessary. It's about recognizing the insidious poison of emotional neglect. It's about the fact that love shouldn't be a competition, and attention shouldn't be a lottery prize. If you have been living in the shadow of a favored sibling, if you have spent your life making yourself smaller just to fit into a role you didn't choose, please hear this. You are not defined by the space your parent afforded you. Your worth is intrinsic. The pain is real, and it deserves to be named, acknowledged, and healed. The regret that came to my mother was delayed, but the damage she caused was instant and lasting. Do not wait for their crisis to finally look at your own pain. Start healing now. Start building your own emotional reserves. You are important. You matter. If this story resonated with the invisible child in you, if you recognize the cold comfort of emotional self-sufficiency, I want you to know you are not alone. Hit the subscribe button. Join this community, and share your quiet victories in the comments below. Let's talk about how we finally stepped out of the shadow and reclaimed our light. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care of yourself, because you are the only one who can truly tend your garden.